Welcome to The Closing Room, brought to you by Capital Title Insurance Agency. The Closing Room is an interview show where our guests are other professionals in the real estate services industries who all have the same goal: help the customer get to the closing room. I'm your host, Tom Lico. My co-host today is the Director of Sales and Marketing for Capital Title, Lisa R. And our guest today is Julie Lepore. Julie is a registered tax preparer and certified acceptance agent who is actively pursuing her enrolled agent designation with the IRS. Her background includes title insurance, mortgage lending, real estate, sales, and public speaking, but it is her passion for people and education that landed her the role as Director of FIRPTA Solutions Incorporated. Welcome, Julie, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me.
All right. So the first thing I want to ask, I'm sure some of our viewers heard FIRPTA and are asking themselves, did he say FIRPTA, and is that even a word? So can you talk about what that acronym, what it stands for, and what's the purpose?
Absolutely. So the acronym is FIRPTA, and it stands for the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act. So back in the 70s, there was an influx of foreign investors, and they were buying all kinds of real estate, selling it for huge profits, and there was no mechanism in place to pay any capital gains tax. Meanwhile, domestic investors were, paying capital gains tax left and right. So they came up with FIRPTA, the Foreign Investment and Real Property Tax Act, to level the playing field between, domestic and foreign investors. And so FIRPTA is a mechanism that enforces a withholding on the sale of real estate when that real estate is owned by a foreign person.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. Because I know we've seen you speak at MLTA events, and it's quite a definition of what constitutes a foreign person.
So a foreign person is, when we're speaking about individuals, it's a non-resident alien. And then when we're talking about entities, it's a foreign corporation, foreign trust, foreign estate, foreign partnership.
Okay. So someone with a green card working here?
Yep. So someone with a green card is considered a lawful resident, permanent resident alien. Okay. So they would be a resident alien, and FIRPTA applies to non-resident aliens. So alien means not a citizen. Okay. So we're looking for people that are not residents of the U.S. and also not citizens of the U.S. That would be a foreign individual, and that person would be subject to the FIRPTA holdback.
Okay. And then what are the withholding requirements? Because that can be a big number, right?
Absolutely. So, there's FIRPTA comes into play in a couple different ways. We'd have to sit here for days to talk about all of them. So I'm really going to focus my responses in on just general real estate. Mm-hmm. But basically it's 15% of the selling price. So whatever the agreed contract price is times 15%, that is the withholding that needs to be collected and sent to the IRS as an estimated tax payment for that seller, unless there is an exception.
There's always exceptions.
That's always
basically
exceptions.
You define the I.R.S. tax code, right?
Right. Yeah.
One rule with 400 exceptions.
Yeah. There's Julie, a laundry list of them.
Julie, I read something that talked about amount realized from the sale. So is it always the sale price, or is it what you're netting?
For our purposes, it's going to be the gross selling price.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Amount realized could be, there's, like I said, there's different ways that FIRPTA can apply in different situations. It's not always a purchase price. So for example, sometimes we're working on a deal right now where two people are exchanging properties, and one is worth a lot of money and one is worth very little. So someone's realizing a gain and someone's taking a loss. And FIRPTA applies because they're both non-resident alien individuals. The properties are investment properties. They don't qualify for any kind of exception. And so even though there's no money exchanging hands, they still have to address FIRPTA on the amount that they are realizing. But that's such a rare situation, that I don't imagine that your average real estate agent or your average title agent is going to run into something like that. So for our purposes, for just regular old purchase transactions, it's usually going to mean the actual selling price of that property.
And where this is coming to rise in Michigan is during the recession, as
Mhm.
you remember, we were, our sales prices were, depressed. Our real estate average sales price dropped in half.
Significantly, yeah.
I made a joke, they might as well have a sign, welcome to Michigan, everything's 50% off, all housing. And so you had a lot of foreign investors, buying up properties, and
Tons.
if you had cash and time, it was a great opportunity. And now it's getting where that time is, hey, the values are back up and then some. And so they're selling. And also because we have, University of Michigan in our sphere and Wayne State universities, where you have foreign students coming and their parents
Mhm.
are
Mhm.
buying a property for them. And they don't even live here. They bought it for their child to live in. And then once they graduate, then they're selling. So does it make a difference when they don't even live here, when you have they're in Asia or Europe or what have you?
Do you mean like, does it make it harder to work with him?
Yeah, I would imagine it would.
I'm gonna say no, because here we are, we're this little tiny office, 8 or 10 person office in Cape Coral, Florida,
Mhm.
and 99% of our clients we've never met face to face.
Yeah.
So we're used to them
Or
not
whether they're a
living
mile
here.
away or 1,000 or 2,000 miles away, doesn't matter. Right?
That's right. That's right. It's interesting though, what you're talking about with all these foreign investors that have bought these properties in Michigan, and now they're turning around and selling them. What would you say would be the average selling price that they're selling for?
Gosh, that's hard to say. Right now our median sales price is over 300,000
Okay.
in Michigan, but when you look at the university area, Ann Arbor, it's probably in that range or higher.
Okay.
The city of Detroit, they were really depressed. Those values were down in the 20, 30,000. And so they could be back up in the 50, 70, or 80,000.
The reason I was asking is because one of the exceptions has to do with the sales price.
Okay.
So if the selling price of a home is $300,000 or less, and the new buyer, not the seller, but the new buyer is going to use that property as a residence, and that's their intention. They're going to use the property as a residence for a good portion of the time that property is in use, and they're going to use it that way for a couple years. Then they can waive the withholding. And so I imagine, probably in the Detroit area, unless the investor is selling to another investor, they're probably selling in those properties to owner occupied purchasers.
Mhm.
And so if they have the opportunity and they understand that it's available to them, I bet a lot of the withholding is being waived because of the sales price. So
The higher ends would probably be more corporate executives coming in, just whether it's GM,
mhm.
Ford, or Chrysler, or what have you, a larger tier.
Well, there's an exception that's available. So that same exception is available for higher purchase prices, but the withholding can't be eliminated altogether. It can only be reduced. So if it starts at 15, it can be reduced down to 10 if the sales price is between 300,000 and $1 million.
Okay.
Anything $1 million or more, there is no exception based on residency that can be applied. And so the withholding is naturally going to be 15%. And there's also that exception, obviously, because it requires the buyer to live in the property. It's not available on, vacant land or,
Right.
Like here in Florida, we sell boat docks. they're deeded.
Oh, yeah.
Boat slips and RV pads and,
Sure.
those kinds of things are not eligible for that type of exception.
Now
So
here's
Julie,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was just going to ask, so who's responsible for making sure withholding is held in a FIRPTA transaction?
The buyer.
So that's the tricky part of this act.
Yeah.
Because initially you would think, as a real estate agent, I'm just worried about, the seller is being that. But really, if you represent a buyer who is purchasing a home where it's a foreign seller and they
Mhm.
are under FIRPTA, the buyer's ultimately the one who is responsible for the tax, which sounds insane. But is it because they're the only one the IRS can track down?
I mean,
I
I'm
mean,
sure that's part of it, but look at capital title.
Mhm,
Okay. So you guys get a paycheck, I'm sure biweekly, right?
mhm. Yes.
And when you get that paycheck, capital title, the company has to withhold income tax and remit it to the IRS to make sure that there's enough there when you go to file your tax return. And that's because our system is a pay-as-you-go system, a pay-as-you-go tax system. So if you got your paycheck and Capital Title took that withholding, they have to send it to the IRS. You know, if they don't send it to the IRS, they would get penalized. And then you would go file your tax return. You'd try to tap into that money, that withholding money, and there's nothing there, you know?
Mhm.
So a withholding tax that by definition is paid by the payer of the income. Well, in a real estate transaction, you've got a payer of the income and a receiver of the income, also known as the buyer and the seller.
Yeah.
And so the payer of the income is the buyer. And so they're deemed the withholding agent, which means they have the responsibility to withhold on that payment that they make to that foreign seller, you know, if indeed that seller is foreign. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it did.
So that's a buyer beware kind of thing, right? Like on your checklist of things to make sure with the seller, one, you know, on the title side, make sure the seller actually owns the property.
Mhm.
That's a
Yeah.
big one we check on.
Well, there's that.
And then, but then that's something they want to make sure, because we had a situation, what wasn't us, it was on the real estate side. They had a customer who bought a house 3 or 4 years ago. It was a FIRPTA situation. It wasn't completed properly. And the customer then 2 or 3 years, whatever it was, they got an invoice from the IRS for $80,000 because it was a high-end property. And obviously they freaked out. And so do they have any recourse at that point, or they just should have addressed it then and oops?
So just based on what you're telling me, probably what happened was that invoice, gosh, there could be a lot going on there.
Yeah, I
So,
think they got bad advice, bad
yeah,
direction from somebody.
you know, unfortunately, it's not well, first of all, the sad news is it's not an isolated incident.
Mhm.
I mean, we get phone calls from buyers on a regular basis, crying their eyes out, begging for help. They've got these huge penalties, you know, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, $80,000 penalties. I saw one time, $180,000
That's
was the
scary.
penalty.
Any letter with that says IRS on it that you get in the mail is scary. And then
Yeah,
you add
for
a bunch of
sure.
commas and zeros and
Yeah. And you know what happens is usually one of two things. Either the money was just sent in late, you know, the money was collected, but for whatever reason, it was sent in late because there was a miscommunication about how it was going to be handled or whose job it was, or was it going to be held in escrow, or was it not going to be held in escrow? And at the end of the day, when the money finally does get submitted, it's submitted late and the penalties are significant. I
yeah,
mean, basically, I mean, 5% of the withholding amount times however many months,
yeah.
you know, that, you know, it does cap out, but the point is that the penalties are significant. So that's one way, that's one thing that happens that generates a lot of penalties is the money gets sent in late.
Mhm.
And the only recourse that the IRS has is to send a notice to the buyer because they were responsible to get that money in on time. And the poor buyer didn't know anything about FIRPTA.
No,
Sometimes they don't even know that the seller is foreign at all. They're just signing their
no.
documents and signing their documents, and they've signed some sort of, you know, FIRPTA related tax form, and they don't even know it. The other thing that happens why buyers get penalties is because the IRS is looking for the withholding amount from them, you
Mhm.
know, whatever the 10 or 15% of that selling price was, plus penalties and interest. So the $80,000 could have been just pure penalties and interest, or it could have been a portion of the withholding amount plus penalties and interest. It's hard to say. Obviously, I don't
Right.
know. And the reason that the IRS chases the buyer for the withholding is because they are thinking they don't have the payment. So what happens a lot of times is the money gets collected, it gets sent to the IRS, and if the IRS has a hard time processing the forms that accompany that payment, or if
Mhm.
forms didn't accompany the payment at all, and they get this payment, they literally don't know what to do with it. So they just deposit it into their general account.
And then wait for someone to call crying.
Exactly. And
Figure
then
it
in the
out later.
meantime, you know, the IRS thinks that the buyer is owing them this 15% of the selling price. And now, so it's all just kind of discombobulated. But to be honest with you, you know, obviously that's a really extreme case of when that
Mhm.
happens, but sometimes you can do everything right. Sometimes the forms are perfect. Sometimes the money's sent in on time. Sometimes they cash the check. And on the surface, it looks like it went through perfectly. It's everything you could dream for.
Yeah.
And then the buyer still gets a penalty letter,
Right.
so you just have to be able to look at the situation and say, okay, where did we go wrong here? And then instantly come up with a plan and have a plan of attack to work that out. And you just have to contact the IRS and make sure that they understand that they've got the payment, make sure that they understand that it came in on time. Because what happens is when they get the mail and you've got IRS forms and you've got a check, they get processed by different parts in that building.
Right. Yeah.
So the forms go one place and the check goes
Right.
another, and sometimes they don't always reconnect on the back end.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
have to do a little bit of legwork to work that out.
Yeah, at the IRS, sometimes the right hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, let alone the left hand.
You said it, not me.
I think on that transaction, if I remember, now it's coming more clear to me,
Mhm.
is that one of the sellers was a US citizen, the other was not.
Mhm.
And
Oh.
I think they were advised by their attorney that that they didn't have to submit anything when they had to in actuality do 50%.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
think that's what happened.
Yeah. When you have multiple sellers and some of them are foreign and some of them aren't, then you still have to withhold the required percentage on that foreign person's share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or it
So,
could be, let me ask you this, a married couple, right?
mhm.
He's a citizen, she's actually originally from Canada, and not a citizen.
Happens all the time.
And especially here where that's in our
Yeah.
back door, as you know. And so,
So
exactly.
the instructions for the forms that we use in that type of situation state that if the sellers are married, they
Mhm.
are they own the property 50-50.
Mhm.
So when it sells, half of the selling price would be subject to the withholding on the share for the spouse that's not a citizen.
Well,
Makes sense.
it is definitely can get complicated and confusing for
It's
sure.
fun though. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm such a
Well, and
dork.
that's why you have a business, because
I,
anybody who is involved with this, buyers and sellers, how many purchases do they do in a lifetime? Not many,
right.
so they wouldn't even know or think about it. But I think a lot of our agents wouldn't think about it, and especially I think that's the big lesson here is that it's that the buyer has just as much interest knowing the seller's situation
The
as,
buyer,
as the other realtor. They more so, right?
yeah, if you go to irs.gov and you look up FIRPTA exceptions, it says right on there, that it says right on there that the buyer has to determine the seller's status.
Yeah.
And if they don't, and they're the IRS finds out about it, the buyer could literally be held liable for that 15% withholding if the seller never filed a tax return.
Mm.
That's the whole point of FIRPTA, is to get that seller to file a tax return and settle up with how much capital gains tax they owe.
Right.
So FIRPTA is a withholding tax. So if that 10 or 15% gets collected at the sale and sent to the IRS, and that foreign seller files a tax return, if the 10 or 15% that was collected is more than enough to cover his capital gains tax, then, or his income tax, I guess, then
Mhm.
he can get a refund of that money. But if he doesn't file it at all and he ended up owing money, and the buyer didn't withhold because he didn't know the seller was foreign, or any number
Right.
of reasons, then they could be liable for that withholding amount, or whatever amount was necessary to cover the seller's
Right.
actual tax.
Because
That's
that's a
scary.
challenge. Yeah. Well, in most cases, the buyer doesn't even meet the seller, maybe at closing, but not anymore. They don't get together at the closing
Right.
table during the
And so that's
pandemic.
that's
So
the other thing too. I mean, Tom, have you ever bought a house before?
yeah,
Yeah. Was your seller foreign?
I
Don't know.
yeah, I can't assume that.
Yeah. How do you know? And so that's the interesting thing is how do we know? How is your average buyer supposed to
Right.
know if their seller is foreign or not? And thankfully the IRS made that process, in my opinion, they've made it pretty easy. I feel as an industry we kind of complicate it a little bit. It's kind of our
Mhm.
nature. But
Right.
the idea is that there's this affidavit, and I'm sure you've heard of it in your business, the affidavit of non-foreign status, right?
Mhm.
And this affidavit, the sworn certificate, if you will, calls for that seller's name, their US tax ID number, their home address or their business address if it's an entity, It has to include a statement that they're not foreign, and then it has to be signed under penalty of perjury. And that sworn statement is given to the buyer. The buyer is supposed to retain that document in their records for 5 years. And if they don't get that document, that's how they're supposed to know to withhold, because the seller's not able to certify in writing that he's not foreign.
Right.
So absent that, the code actually is pretty interesting. There's a line in there that says, receipt of this certification eliminates the liability for the buyer.
Is there
So-
like a privacy issue though with the buyer having the seller's
Tax ID number?
or social security number even?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. There's definitely.
Yeah, what
privacy
seller's going to
concerns.
sign that? Hey, the buyer whom you've never met, whom you don't know, wants this information from you.
Yeah. So back in 2008, the IRS acknowledged that there was definitely some privacy concerns there. And so they came up with an alternative delivery method via the use of a qualified substitute. So the qualified substitute would be whoever in the transaction that's doing the closing. So the IRS code, the tax code allows for the seller to make that same sworn certification and deliver it to the closing agent, but the closing agent has to turn around and give a very similar sworn statement to the buyer, letting them know that, they have the seller's affidavit in their records. So no matter what, a buyer should walk away with some sort of sworn statement from someone, either
Right.
the seller themselves or the closing agent, letting them know that the seller's not foreign, and they should keep that in their records for 5 years.
Well, we've had you come up for the Michigan Land Title Association and give a presentation. And Lisa, this sounds like a Con Ed class in the making. We want to.
Yeah, I think that would be great.
Yeah, something we want to do. This. How's it been going since the pandemic for you? Have you just been still doing presentations just via Zoom? Or
We have been, they have all been webinars. I haven't really done anything in person. And the pandemic actually is, gosh, number one, just how dreadful is it for everybody? It's so dreadful. But as far as like my work is concerned, we are really feeling it because we rely on the IRS to process these applications for us.
Mhm.
And things that used to take 30 days or 45 days or 90 days are now taking 3 months and 6 months and 9 months or more. So we had made the call a few months ago to not push through any more withholding certificates the rest of this year, because we just knew the IRS, they didn't stand a chance. They were behind like 10 million pieces of mail or 20 million pieces of mail, something like that, when they came back from working from home. So they are extremely behind, and
At least they don't have to count votes.
yeah, we'd still be waiting. But the thing about the FIRPTA unit, so it's cool because as someone who submits those kind of applications on a regular basis, you get to call them and they get used to you, and they get used to your applications. And I've dealt with a lot of IRS agents in my time, and some of them have been outstanding, and some of them have probably need to retire. I'm going to say that nicely, but the people in the FIRPTA unit, gosh, they're so nice.
Yeah.
They're easy to work with. They're so nice. They, will reach out if they've got questions. They'll send notifications asking for additional information. I feel like they're just really committed to seeing these applications through. And I just feel so bad for them that they're so, overwhelmed with,
Sure.
with mail right now. But we're definitely feeling the impact of COVID on every level.
Yeah. Well, this also shows the need for your business. It's a nice little niche you've carved out, because it is something that's complicated, can be confusing, and having someone like yourself who can help guide someone navigate them through these seas that can be a bit overwhelming. So that's great that you have that. A couple of things, if I could shift gears and just kind of on the personal side of things. So it's my understanding you have Michigan roots, right? You're originally from Michigan.
I sure do. I was born at McLaren Hospital in Flint, Michigan.
Oh, wow. And how old were you when you left?
I was 8.
Oh,
I was
okay.
8. Yep. I was 8 years old when we left. My dad retired from General Motors,
Uh,
decided he wanted
you worked
to,
for GM in Flint back in the day.
yes. Yeah, he worked at the Buick plant. And he decided we were going to move to Florida. So he retired and we packed up and came to Florida and never looked back. I mean,
Okay.
Michigan's a beautiful state, but there's snow.
You still have family here though? Come back?
Um, in Michigan, oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. My entire family, like almost all of my family is still in Michigan.
Okay.
Yep.
So, because I think when you came up for one of our conferences, did you stay a little bit to visit family or?
I did. I came
Yeah.
up, I think I came up just a day early or
Yeah.
I left a day later. I'm not really sure. And I was in Livonia or I was in
Okay.
Grand Rapids. I'm not really sure where I was. 2019 is a blur. I don't remember
Yeah.
any of it. It feels
Might as
like
well be
5
10
years
years
ago.
ago. Yeah, it
Right,
is.
Tom? 5 years ago.
Right.
But yeah, I got to visit with my brother a little bit at the hotel, and I hadn't seen him in years, so it
Oh,
was
that's
another benefit of working here at FIRPTA Solutions, and
yeah.
I
And
love
then
it.
another thing I noticed on your LinkedIn, it says that you are a singer and that you are, is it a acoustic duet that sings from
Yeah.
Patsy Cline to
y-
Alice in Chains?
yes. We had a little two-person gig, and
Mhm.
my buddy Mike played guitar and I did vocals, and he did vocals too. But
Yeah.
we just played the local bar scene, and we did like some corporate gigs and birthdays and weddings, and
Yeah.
gosh, it was fun. It was
Yeah.
a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's some of the things that are just gone now. I miss. I love live music, or just
Me
that
too.
coffee shop scene. The acoustic guitar.
Hmm.
I love that background. Things like stand up comedy or things like that are just taking a hit because you can't get in these small groups, and so it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Entertainment or those escapes.
We had dinner last night at a place that had outdoor seating, and got to sit down and listen to a guy play guitar, just a solo act, and I was like,
Mm,
oh,
nice.
Yeah.
it felt so good. It felt so good to it was like, are we almost normal? Nah, no, we're not almost normal.
Right.
Restaurants in Michigan are setting up heated tents for outdoor dining, getting ready for winter.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Yeah, no, our weather's been amazing. I'm
Yeah.
not gonna rub it in, but it's been amazing. But we also have a huge hurricane on the way, so there's that.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you don't have hurricanes in Michigan. Well, we
No.
have. Well, we've come to a point where this is our up close from a distance segment.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm scared.
And this is where we take a minute to get to know you a little better while maintaining our social distance. I'm going to
Clever.
ask you 10 questions, and I need the first answer that comes to your mind. And we
Okay.
have 60 seconds, so we'll start the clock now. Do you prefer texting, talking, or email? Quick answer.
Talking.
Okay. What's worse, winters in Michigan or summers in Florida?
Winters in Michigan.
Okay. Patsy Cline or Karen Carpenter?
Patsy Cline.
Beyonce or Rihanna?
Rihanna.
Finish this sentence. Taylor Swift is.
Pretty talented.
Okay. Paper or plastic or bring your own?
Oh, I'm plastic. I'm sorry. But I do recycle them.
Okay. Would you rather be able to speak every language in the world or be able to talk to animals?
Every language in the world.
Huh? How many cups of coffee do you drink a day?
24 ounces.
Okay. Who was your first celebrity crush?
Kevin Costner.
And is it wrong for a vegetarian to eat animal crackers?
No,
Hey, well,
not
hey,
at all.
you got 10 for 10, so
Oh,
you win
that's
our home
great.
version of the game.
Oh,
So
that's amazing.
I want to thank you, Julie. Should any of our viewers be interested in retaining your services, what is your contact information? And we'll put that on the screen. But
So on our website is www.firptasolutions.com. And there are multiple ways that they can reach out to us and ask for help depending on, what it is that they're looking for. They can also call me here at the office,
okay.
239-540-1022. And if I'm available, I'll take their call.
All right. And then Lisa, we're going to be working on putting a Con Ed class together via Zoom, probably over the winter time, maybe once things slow down a little bit.
Hopefully, maybe we'll get it on for January.
Okay. And that way you can do your full presentation, PowerPoint if you need be, and, chat from the audience, asking questions. You're willing to do that for us?
Absolutely.
All right.
Let's do it.
Well, that's our show for this week. So thank you again, Julie, for being our guest. And also thank you to our sponsor, Capital Title, for making this possible. To our viewers, if you hang on for a few seconds, you can view our humorous meme of the week. And we hope to see you next time in the closing room. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So
That was fun.